Hello everyone, this is Greg Tong with Management Roundtable. It's my pleasure to welcome all of you to today's webinar, which is entitled R&D and Open Innovation Metrics. Our presenter today will be Wayne Mackey, who's a principal at Product Development Consulting Inc., and he's with us today from his man cave / office in California. Wayne will be discussing the use of predictive analytics to manage and mitigate the inherent risks of open innovation projects. At Management Roundtable, we've worked with Wayne for many years. He's served as chairman at a number of our MRT conferences and is one of our most highly rated speakers and workshop instructors. In his spare time, Wayne is a semi-professional photographer. We've actually had him take photos at some of our events as well. He's also an amateur musician and an aspiring, and this is a new vocabulary word for many of you, enologist, which is, I guess, another word for wine connoisseur. But Wayne is here today to talk to us about wine. He's here to talk to us about open innovation analytics. In case you don't know, Management Roundtable's annual conference on co-development and open innovation, CoDev 2014, is going to be held in just a couple of weeks in Phoenix. For more information on these and other product development learning events, you can visit our website, managementroundtable.com. Also, I should mention on March 6th in San Francisco, Wayne will be leading a session for us on 3D printing and additive manufacturing and its impact on traditional product development. Again, visit managementroundtable.com for more information on any of those. Before we do begin, I have a few quick housekeeping items I need to cover. Each of you should have received via email the details to log on to the webinar portion of today's session. For the best experience, we highly recommend that you install the Adobe Connect add-in to your computer. The way to know if you have that add-in is if you are viewing the webinar inside of a web browser, then you are not using that add-in. If you want to install that, you should see a phone icon in the upper toolbar of your browser screen. Just click on that and follow the prompts that say connect to your computer, and you'll be installing the Adobe add-in. Once the program has concluded, just note that we will be emailing to everyone a link to an online feedback form. We'd appreciate it if you could take a couple of minutes and fill that form out and give us any suggestions you have for future webinars as well. We know that many of you may have others joining you on today's call that aren't on our list. If you could forward that email to them as well, we'd appreciate it. Please note that once you complete that feedback form, you will get a link to a copy of the slides used today in PDF format and a link to a recorded version of today's session that you can share with other people who weren't able to join us. During today's session, you will have ample opportunity to ask questions. You don't have to wait to ask your question. You can do so at any time. Just call up the Q&A window that you see on your screen and type it into there, and we'll pick up on that and address your question to Wayne. Just remember that if you have your slides expanded to full screen, you will need to exit to full screen mode to get at that Q&A chat window. All right, it is time for us to begin with today's session. Please welcome Wayne Mackey.
Well, welcome everyone. I'm glad to see we have so many people with us on this interesting topic. So let me introduce what I'm going to do here. We actually do a couple of day version of this, and so my challenge in putting this together was to be able to add value in a 1-hour session and cover a few of the critical points, kind of an inch wide and a mile deep, although this is a broad and important subject in so many ways. So what we're going to cover is streamlining the processes, optimizing decisions, and managing risk around open innovation. First of all, let me introduce myself. You're getting a view of my office with in all of its clutter and garbage. But who am I from the standpoint of being qualified, if you will, to teach this as opposed to be listening to it? First of all, I'm a principal with a company called Product Development Consulting. As the name would imply, we work with companies that we like to characterize as serious about achieving a measurable improvement in product development results. We've been around for a long, long time. Our corporate office is in Boston, and my office is in Manhattan Beach, California. We're what's known as a principals-only firm, and so the idea there is that none of our consultants at our company are career consultants. We've all worked at least 20 years in the industry before becoming a consultant. We like to think that that gives us a little bit more of a view of putting things in at companies that are actually workable in the real world instead of just academic ideas about how wouldn't this be neat if we could do this. We work exclusively within product development. We've implemented practical systems and tools with dozens and dozens of companies. We've also written some books. Now, the books are arguably snoozers, but there are some important concepts on there that will amplify on some of what I'm going to talk about today. The most recent being Innovate Products Faster, which was one piece of it was written. It's written about practical tools to do a whole bunch of different things in innovation. All right, enough of that. Let's go into open innovation goals and analytics, and I'll start with a framework of what this is. Since we have a broad and diverse group of people here, let me begin with some definitions. First of all, what's open innovation? Now, this is my definition, not necessarily the only definition, but this is when you buy, trade, or license processes, business models, inventions, or innovations from outside of your enterprise. Now, I use enterprise specifically in that as a description here, in that these are the things that your company owns, and those could be different brands or things like that. But basically, it's all inside your company. Now, what's an invention? Since I mentioned that, my definition of invention is something that's brand new to the world. It's a technology, service, or approach, including a business model. An innovation, on the other hand, is combining inventions to create customer or business value. The reason that's important is that inventions, while there are some notable exceptions to it, inventions don't make companies much in the way of money. Innovations do, because these are the things that are focused on not so much discovering something that's never been done before, but instead on applying those things that have been done before in a useful manner for businesses or for your customers' value. We're going to talk about metrics. We're going to talk about analytics before we talk about metrics. Now, analytics has become a hot topic now, and so I'll give you my definition of it. Analytics are, it's really a three-step process: how you organize, discover, and then apply the patterns of data to gain insight or to take action. And the organizing and discovering pieces of it are actually the ones that companies don't tend to do as well as some of the applying the data patterns, which they can use software for and other things. So we're going to talk today a little bit about setting up for success in analytics, and that's putting these together in an organized way and then applying your metrics and data and information to discover and then apply data patterns to be able to predict the future or to take action. What's a metric? A metric is the description of a standard of measure that's used to assess any situation or monitor progress. A measurement is the execution of a metric. For instance, if I were to say the metric for the in my office right here, it would be the temperature of the room in degrees Fahrenheit. The measurement would be 71. Now, that same measurement later on might be 69 or 75 or some other number, but the metric stays the same. The measurement is what's different. Now, when we talk about metrics, we talk about different types of metrics. The first type is a result metric. These are as all metrics are, a description of a standard of measurement, but it's used to assess end items, things like return on investment, cycle time, number of items that have been shipped. A causal action is something that causes a result to happen, and if it's successful. A predictive metric, sometimes called a process metric, is, like all metrics, a description of a standard of measurement, but it's used to assess those causal actions, the things that will tend to cause the result to happen. The reason they're important, the reason predictive metrics are important and finding the causal actions associated with them are important, is that they happen both early and often relative to the goal. And that's important because as leaders and as decision makers, whether you're an implementer, a leader, an executive in your company, having early information often allows you to work on problems before they become a raging fire. So with those definitions to kind of ground everybody to start out with, let's go on into what it takes to be successful in doing analytics right. First, we want to define and connect the improvement goals. It's very important that, that we are aligned. Because one company may have problems with getting things to market on time. Another company may have problems with getting things to market at the right cost. One company may have customer value issues where their customers hate them or their customers love them. That's why it's important to start with goals whenever we go into analytics. Because if we want to find answers, we need to find answers along a pathway that is pertinent to your company. The same good analytics for company A may be the worst in, analytics and backup data in the world for company B because they simply don't have the same problems. So all analytics and all metrics start with defining and connecting the improvement goals. From that, we then go underneath those to what are the causal actions that lead to each goal? What are really the things that we have to put together early and often relative to that goal in order to be successful at doing it? most people, or most professionals, when they're working every day, in fact, if you think of your work today, what's going on today, you probably have a good idea of whether today's project is a high flyer or is it circling the drain on its way out. And so the causal actions are the things that you're already measuring in your head, and looking at those and gathering the experience of the organization on those actually gives us great insight into the right metrics and therefore analytics. Now, the reason the property associated with this is that it's owned is that we're counting on the experience of the organization itself. So if you will, if you're the leader of an organization and you want to set up analytics and metrics for your organization, you start with the goal and you pass the goal to the people who have to implement it at whatever level they're at. But they set up what the right causal actions are. They're closest to the process, and as a result, they really have the greatest insight into what will make you successful or will make something fail. And finally, the last of the 3 steps to success is determining the critical few. You may have massively many metrics. In most cases, that gets in the way of being able to focus on those things that will really make a difference. And once we determine the critical few, we set metrics for the causal actions and the targets for the near and midterm associated with it. And the property here is that we're focused. So good analytics are aligned, they're owned by the people who are using them, and they're focused. So a long time ago, when I first started doing work in metrics, I was often asked, well, you know, how's this approach different than anything else, or how are these metrics going to be useful when other ones were just a pain in the neck? So I came up with a little elevator talk, so if I'm on a diet, and some of you may have been on a diet before, but if I'm on a diet and I've decided to lose 15 pounds, let's think about the metrics associated with that. Now, it's pretty easy to measure, and many of you may have heard of the idea of SMART metrics, but it's pretty easy to measure my weight in pounds, right? I can jump on a scale and I can weigh myself and record my weight. Now, this is actually an interesting thought from the standpoint of some of the metrics in your companies as well. When I go across businesses and into companies, often I find that they're measuring things that are easy to measure. They're measuring things that they've measured for a long time, but they're really not getting the value out of them that they should be. So why is that? Well, we saw in the prior slide that we have to start with the goal. Now, so what's my goal in losing 15 pounds? It's not aligned to anything. There are a lot of reasons to lose weight or go on a diet. I can do that to be healthier. I can do that to look better. I can do that just because I want to change the way I eat. There are a lot of different reasons for doing it, but you'll notice that this goal, as I stated it, decided to lose 15 pounds, is not aligned with anything important. So we don't know why we're doing it. There's no context with which to use it then. I'm also measuring the results instead of the things that cause the results to happen. I don't know about your experience, but my experience with diets is that just recording my weight, sometimes I have great days, other days I have pretty crappy days. And so as a result, measuring the results are not really getting me the results that I want. So what do we do instead? What I want to do is we'll start with the goal of being healthier. And then what I want to measure is my caloric intake, how much food I'm taking in, and my exercise time, how much I'm burning food with exercise. And I know that's a simplistic way of looking at it, but these are causal actions to actually losing weight. And if I track these items, then I actually get some success in the results. So the non-intuitive piece of this, and where the elevator talk takes us on this, is the idea that if you want better results in a diet, stop measuring your weight and start measuring the things that cause that goal to happen. So the interplay here is important as well. Process and results metrics, or analytics, have to work together to be successful. We want to measure the things that cause our success to happen or our goal to happen, but we also want to measure those things that are the results to make sure that we're on track with what we really want to achieve. So the first question is always the goal, and you see the cup there at the end. If we're starting off on some new project or on some new way of doing business, we want to start off with the goal in mind. Then what we want to do is we want to measure our process metrics. And these process metrics occur in those tight feedback loops because they occur early and often relative to the goal. And lo and behold, we get down through our schedule a little bit and something went wrong. Because we're measuring the things that cause the goal to happen instead of the goal itself, we see that early, maybe before our weight has changed in the diet scenario, and can correct it before it becomes a bigger problem. We then proceed a little bit further after fixing the problem, a little bit of success, and then another little problem pops up. Because we're measuring the way we are, we find the problem, and we fix the problem. Now, about every 8 times that you do a review of your process metrics, I like to step back and take a look at the results. Because let's say that that's going back to the diet scenario. If my caloric intake is right and I'm exercising correctly, then about every 8 times I take a reading on those, I want to be taking a reading on my weight, because if I'm doing both of those things right and my weight goes up, then what that means is that I have to make a change in either my caloric intake or my exercise time, or make some other change that will make a difference in achieving the goal. So the results metrics check is important in the middle of doing things, and the interplay of these process metrics with the results metrics is really what makes companies successful when they do this. Now, that doesn't mean that at the end of your 8 looks at your process metrics that you go back to managing on results. What you want to do is you want to use that to adjust, refine, and change your process metrics, and then you go on running the business of getting to your goal with your process metrics. And there will be ups and downs, as shown in this graph. But in order to get to our goal here, what we want to do is run the business on the process measures, because they allow us to predict and make early decisions, and then achieve the goal by every so often checking on the results. So this is the interplay between results and process metrics. Now, I mentioned one of the things that we have to do as we shift over to open innovation, one of the things we have to do is look at the whole picture of open innovation. Now, when I put together the Maslow's hierarchy, as I call it, of open innovation relationships, I don't mean to say that one or more of these are right or wrong. Different relationships with the outside world, either the suppliers of innovation or your other partners, are not right or wrong. They depend on the situation, the types of things you're trying to achieve. So let's start at the bottom. Outside of the realm of partnering, we have arm's length. That's where we either put our name on their part or we buy their part. This is where we're just a customer of a vendor. Moving up into the partnership realm, the lowest level on the Maslow's hierarchy of open innovation relationships is being directive. They build or develop it to our specifications, and all decisions at all levels reside inside of the customer company. In other words, my company. Moving up from that, and these are both in the realm of what I call outsourcing, is an interactive relationship where we tell them what we want, but not how to do it. Some decision-making is outside, but all product-level decisions are made inside. Moving up the hierarchy, collaborative arrangements are where we have a joint design, and usually this involves some kind of an intellectual property split in terms of its ownership. We own it only partially, or we share the ownership of the final design or work. And then finally at the top of the Maslow's hierarchy is a risk-reward sharing. This is where the two partners are actually both in it together. It's usually some kind of a joint product that both will succeed or fail on at the same time. Above and beyond partnerships, we have mergers and acquisitions and equity stakes. Often, the higher levels of Maslow's hierarchy relationships end up being mergers and acquisitions, because we end up finding synergies that we want inside the company. So when we talk about open innovation relationships, anywhere on this hierarchy is right, depending on the need and the type of thing that you're trying to achieve and your goal, going back to the idea that goals should drive everything when we set up our analytics. So let's talk about opportunities. I'm going to move into an area of risk management here, because an awful lot of what I see at companies that are putting together open innovation involves understanding the risks and making sure that we know that we're taking these risks with our eyes wide open. First of all, risk begins with the opportunity or the risk analysis. And this is what I call the external perspective. What's the size of the opportunity, or what is the consequence or pain of failure? And this is the first step in any type of analysis of risk or opportunity. Second, the assessment of that. This is the enterprise perspective. We're adding in to the concept of what's our internal probability of success. what's our chance of succeeding at doing this or achieving, or at least mitigating this risk or achieving the opportunity? At this point, we're also setting a target. A long time ago, when I first learned a little bit about risk management, one of the keys to risk management is you have to set a target. If there's no target, then there's no risk. You can either succeed or fail depending on whether you're a cup half full or a cup half empty type person. But without a target, there's no opportunity and there's no risk. The target is the baseline against which the probability of success or failure is determined. And then finally, the third piece of this is mitigation. So now that we've analyzed and assessed the risk and the opportunity, what do we do about it? And that's the mitigation, and that's the project perspective. What are we going to do to mitigate the risk? Now, this is where open innovation often enters the equation, in that, okay, so we would like to do this internally, but we can't. So how are we going to mitigate our internal risk? By going outside and using open innovation to be successful. All right, so let's pause for a second. Are there any questions from the group?
We do have one question, Wayne, if you see it down there in the bottom. Would you like me to read it?
Actually, I don't have it showing on mine, but go ahead.
Okay. This is from Dame Billingsley. She asks, if you assume that your process is continually trending up, as you did in slide 7, does that prompt the metric developer to discuss the goals with the business if more can continue to be achieved?
Well, actually, of course, that's the good news metric when it always goes up. And sometimes instead of just continuing up, it'll actually go below the beginning start line. So first of all, that's to some degree just a little bit of chartsmanship to show how it works. However, underneath that is the idea that if we have those tight feedback loops and we're measuring the things that cause the goal to happen instead of just the goal itself, we actually have a much better chance of proceeding forward and having an upward look. Now, one of the changes in the culture, if I understand where your question is leading on this, one of the changes in culture is that we want to reward people for fixing small problems, paying attention to small issues and fixing small problems. Now, the risk there is that as you continue to move further and further up, maybe the goal also moves further and further up, and we can do better things and more important things going forward. Now, if that's too much of a stretch, then maybe it makes sense to make sure that our results review include the idea that we're proceeding on exactly the path we expected to in going forward. Instead of, maybe we can speed this up, maybe we can't. So there's some cultural issues around that, if I understand your question right, that we have to be prepared for in setting our targets and where we'll be at the different stages of doing it. Going back to the diet scenario, if my goal is to lose 15 pounds and I find at my first review that I've already lost 12, does that mean that I should change the goal, or does that mean I can eat a few more chocolate cakes along the way? And that's the decision that the business has to make in terms of where they want to go when they find their results are not either where they're supposed to be good or bad. Any other questions at this point?
Yes, there is another one. You specified 8 process measurements for each results measurement. Why 8?
What we want to do is we want to allow the process metrics, or managing the business on process metrics, to have a chance to go forward before we start managing on results. If, for instance, on one day, going back to the diet scenario, if in one day I overdid my calorie intake, it doesn't mean that I should throw out the entire diet. What I want to do is I want to be able to manage on that for a while before I take a look at the results. Instead of stepping on the scale every day and maybe either being thrilled or being less than thrilled as I proceed forward, then what's important is that I manage on the process metrics and only look at the results metrics every so often to make sure I'm on track. If we look at the results metrics all the time, then we tend to manage on results, and we never get the opportunity to see the benefit of managing on those predictive process metrics. Any other questions now?
No other questions right now. If you do have a follow-up or a new question, please type that into the Q&A window.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to proceed. We've defined the risk continuum, but now we need a couple of tools to be able to do that. This is a simple tool, like all good tools are, and it looks at the relative value to the customer versus the relative performance that meets that need that you can achieve. And this is the first step in understanding and executing, if you will, a risk management around open innovation. So let's start at the with the scales. First of all, the bottom scale is a reverse scale, where the best possible is at the left and the worst possible is at the right. The vertical axis is a normal axis, so we either provide everything from at the bottom, no value to the customer, or at the top, all the value we possibly could on this particular parameter or feature. And what we want to do is we have those two endpoints. So given that we're a competent organization, we can run the entire length of this and kind of map out where the customer is on this. I'm seeing this type of a tool, by the way, more and more within my client base in non-static specifications. In other words, if we want to give our designers a little bit of flexibility to design, we want to show them where it falls off a cliff once they achieve a performance level that may have to be traded off against something else. So in this particular graph, what we have is we have the relative value starts off when we're doing our very best and stays relatively constant for quite a while. Then it takes a nosedive about a third of the way through, and then it kind of evens off towards the end where we're providing just a little bit of value. What's important about this is that this is the marketplace perspective. This is the first piece of understanding risk that I mentioned before. And so if we understand how the customer views our relative level of performance, then we have a pretty good shot at understanding the risk associated with it. All right, so where do we want to set our target value? You can see that the value curve here gives us a lot of insight as to where we might want to set our targets. We don't really get a lot more customer value to the left of that target bar, yet it might make it a lot harder for our engineers to design it. So by understanding the value the customer gets from any feature, it allows us to set our target values as far to the right as we're willing to go. So let's take an example of this in terms of target setting. Let's say that we have a project. I call it Project ABC in this case. We've divided up the relative importance to the customer among 5 simple pieces. Now, in the real business world, this could be 25 or 30 different pieces as you break it down along WBS lines or things like that. But in this case, let's say we have a product that we're trying to start to get to market. Our speed curve looks different than our accuracy curve, which is different than our safety curve, our ease of use, and reliability. Each of them has a total weight based on the customer's weight, which is shown in the lower right-hand corner of the chart. What's important here is that if we set our targets as close as we can to the left, which is the best, then we can aim at how much customer value we can get out of each one of these. You'll notice that on those that have very sharp corners, we've set them right at the corner so that we can achieve the highest level of customer satisfaction or value by not having the strongest specification in doing it. But there's still problems here. So if this is the outside viewpoint, this is how the customer views it and what our target is for our specification, if you will, inside our company. Let's take those same things and we're going to project on them the internal perspective. So going back to the original graph that I had earlier, what do we do when we think of our perspective? How well can we do it? What's our most likely level of performance on any particular feature? And we'll mark that one with an X. So we're going to be right there where that X is, most likely based on our past performance. We put that up at the top. Then we want to find out, well, how badly are we likely to do, and how well might we do if we do the best we possibly could. And I'll mark those with a Z, so the best and worst. And then let's draw a little curve on that. The curve, and I just made it a simple hyperbola here, and it goes from the best to the worst. And the reason this is important to look at is you've just taken the customer value along with your ability to perform inside the company and map those one after another. And then if you shade that portion to the right, that's your risk. The risk is the area to the right of the target that is within your curve of your performance probability. So I know this is a lot to swallow in a short presentation, but the idea here is this is how we define our risk. What's important about this from an open innovation standpoint is that, let's go back to our prior items. We see that speed, if we look at our performance against it, has a lot of red ink on it. If we look at the best we could do, that's the little dotted line, and versus the worst we could do, we're projecting from the 2 bottom spots of our performance, we can lose a lot of customer value there. 11 points of customer value could potentially be lost based on our level of performance between our best and our worst. Let's do the same with the rest of them, and we can see that we get a picture emerging here. And so what jumps out of this view? What jumps out is the safety issue. Within our range of performance, we could lose 17 points or almost all the potential customer value for this particular product. But what's significant about this is that, that this is our number one issue in terms of risk. And if we only take the internal perspective, we're going to be in a lot of trouble in this, and we can try to manage our way out of this. But perhaps rather than managing our way out of all these risks, why don't we take a different look? Let's go to the external world and open innovation and say, okay, so this is our problem using internal technology from safety. If we have a good look at how other companies do this, perhaps companies that specialize in this safety aspect of our types of projects, what we might want to do is find somebody else's solution that moves that bar, that curve, if you will, of the overall performance to their curve. Their curve, in terms of safety, is far to the left or better than ours. And so what we can do is we can mitigate our risks then on this project by moving over to an external relationship where they provide the safety piece of our product.
Excuse me, Wayne, we have a quick question from Brian Gardner who asks, in terms of generating these curves, he's wondering, are these guesses or are there ways to understand the customer value at each level?
That's an excellent question. First of all, what we want to use is the concept of what I call best available knowledge. If you don't have a strong program of being able to listen to your customers, and let me be clear, that's not the program of talking to your customers, that's the program of listening to your customers to understand really where their interest is in each of the key features in your product. Then what you want to use is the best available knowledge. Gather up the marketing folks, the sales folks, anyone else who has some customer insight, and plot the curves yourself. Obviously, that's not as good as having the customer input drive those curves. But even if you drive those curves yourself, you can then have a very easy-to-understand tool to use with the customer to say, well, is this your type of view when you do go out to listen, even in an informal way? Is this how you view our relative level of performance in terms of how you value it? So the value curves, and in terms of understanding them, can run the gamut of doing them yourself internally with the best available knowledge to, if you have a strong program to be able to listen to and process the data and information from customers, that can generate the curves all by itself. And then you can do another iteration with the customer on that to make sure that you got it right. Are there other questions?
Yeah, we have another question on, are there any thoughts about resources associated to risk mitigation strategies?
Yeah, in fact, once again, an excellent question. The external technology switches, using external technology, as I have on this slide, actually allows us to switch the resources from internal resources if you don't have the capacity. You may even have the capability internally, but if you don't have the capacity, you can switch the capacity to an external partner. Now, most external partners have to be paid, so you're moving it from a human resource need, over to a monetary resource application. And some companies that have particularly large applications that they have to develop can sometimes even do this without paying the external partner. Instead, they give them a piece of the ultimate output of the product itself, so they can buy a piece of the benefit when the product is launched with no money today going to them. So often open innovation is used for capacity, and it's also used for capability. But capacity is the resource play in this, allowing us to put our resources on those things that are core to our business, as opposed to having to use our resources on things that are really not the strategic value in the product, if we instead take that over to some company who does specialize in that particular area.
And we have a follow-up question to that, Wayne, asking, does your technique differentiate between strategic and operational risks?
Okay, so what's strategic? Strategic are those things, this is my definition, Strategic are those items that make your product your product. In other words, why do I buy an Apple computer versus buying one from Xerox or from some other company or from Acre or from IBM? It's what makes your product your product. And so anything strategic is what you specialize in and what you feel is your core competency and what adds value in your brand versus another. And again, that's my definition. Those things that are not core to you are candidates to go outside. Even if you're not the best at something, if it really is core to you and it's why people buy your product, then you don't want to give those away. Now, they still may be candidates for external partnering and open innovation, but you want to have that very tightly held, and ultimately you may want to pull out of that relationship later once you've learned what you have to. So protecting the core business is actually where a lot of companies go wrong in open innovation. They see somebody who can do something cheaper than they can, and so yeah, well, let's go out and save money. And saving money, well, everybody likes to save money. Saving money is not how you make money. Making money is different. Making money has to do with protecting your brand and enhancing your brand by not doing those things that distract you, but doing those things that are core to your business and core to your brand. Other questions?
No more additional questions at this time.
Okay. All right, let's press on. I've spent a lot of time on risk. As I mentioned, I'm trying to do some inch-wide and mile-deep dives into some of the aspects of open innovation. Necessarily, I can't cover everything at a deep level, but let's move on a little bit from the risk. Mine is not advancing. Oh, there we go. Okay. Oh, by the way, what that last thing did is we took our number 1 risk and turned it into our number 5 risk by using an external technology partner. And that's an important aspect of doing this. Okay, so let's go into some open innovation analytics best practices. And this is kind of the, often when I do work for a management roundtable and we have a large group in the room, they say, well, Wayne, it's nice to understand why we do this stuff, but why don't you just answer the damn question? So that's where this comes from. So what are the best practices? What do people actually do? What are the dashboards people use? And what are some of the best analytics that I've seen having to do with open innovation? So first of all, I like to use, I have a bias towards simple tools. And the first tool that I'm going to go is a metrics tree. And so when we look at this example, we have to understand that analytics, by their nature, have a level property to them, right? The right analytics for your CEO are not the right analytics for your drill press operator. It's important to realize the level. So let's look at this as a tree coming down from the strategy at the company level. In this case, external partners will supply innovations, driving new products and services, commanding higher margins, and achieving greater market share. The metric here is margin growth over sales with our headcount constant. So this is an important metric. By the way, this is, I see way too many metrics in my practice area, but this is actually the right metric at a corporate level to understand whether you're really innovative or not. Many companies measure percentage of sales for new products, and that's become the poster child of terrible metrics for innovation because it drives all kinds of bad behavior. But margin growth over sales is actually a great measure of whether or not you're innovative at a company level. Coming from that, though, now let's flow that down. Let's say we have a target area there of 10%. Let's go down to our open innovation leaders. What would our leaders' actions or team goals be? We want to increase, and these are the things that actually cause that to happen above it. This is the same causal action turned into a goal. So we want to increase our listening post reach. Right? The further we can reach out into the potential solutions, the better we are in terms of understanding where we might be able to find a solution externally. Increase the value of ideas inside the pipeline. This has to do with not just the quantity of ideas, but instead the value of those ideas. Improve our speed to market. This is the type of thing that we use open innovation for. Speed to market is a good reason to do open innovation. If somebody else already has something that's out there, you don't have to develop it. You don't have the learning curve associated with it. Optimizing the utilization of resources. We talked about that earlier based on the question from the gentleman earlier, the idea of using your resources on the things that are core to your business as opposed to putting them on the things that can best be done by somebody who specializes in them outside the company. then optimizing the portfolio of investments. All of these items are causal to the company strategy and are appropriate to the leadership level in terms of open innovation. Feeding, and these are just some targets that I threw in there, the types of things that we want to increase, and what's our 75% to BIC, which is best in class in terms of the portfolio of investments. The team then, say a project team, what do? Their actions would be to have the extended enterprise aggregate native intellectual property utilization be high. And so the idea there is that if we already have existing intellectual property in several of the areas for the new product we're trying to develop, but other people already have existing intellectual property and things in the rest of the areas, then we can actually have across the extended enterprise 100% native intellectual property, and all we have to do is put it together. A metric associated with this would be patent or idea diffusion. Many companies measure the number of patents, and I know that's easy to measure, and it's tempting to do that, but much more important is your patent diffusion rate, which is a measure of how each patent diffuses into products or sales. It's a little harder to set up, but it's a much more useful measure of patents and ideas than just counting the number of patents. The second one, arguably one of the best metrics I run across anywhere at a team level, and that's information turns. Some of you may be familiar with inventory turns in a factory. That's where we have to buy a bunch of parts, we add value to them, and then we get paid when we produce a product using that. How fast we do that is our inventory turns, and that's an oversimplification, but that's the nature of turns. Well, think about in our product development and in areas like this, our product is really information. It may be in the form of a CAD drawing. It may be in the form of just turning over a research property to the people who will develop a product. So if our product is information, isn't it interesting that so few companies measure the speed at which we move information from either the outside or within the company? And so information turns, the metrics associated with it is the mean time from external discovery to internal application. Next up, risk retirement. What's really important in terms of schedule when we're doing any kind of a product development? What we want to do is we want to understand our risks and retire them, either positive or negative. If they can't be, if there's no way to fix this, we need to know that early before we spend a lot of money, not late. And so the metric associated with risk retirement is the extended enterprise cycles of learning. Now, if you really want to go to the head of the class, you add complexity weighting to it because different risks have different complexity associated with them. But what are our cycles of learning, and how do we make those shorter so that we can find our issues and move them forward? More and more companies are dismantling their stage gate systems and instead putting in systems that are cycles of learning and using the best of what they have in their stage gate systems or in their gate systems and turning that, instead of being a serial development, into cycles of learning that allow them to be more nimble and responsive to market and other needs. And then finally, resource application. What are our staff ratios? In other words, do we have the right mix of creators versus implementers? Do we have the right mix of project managers versus designers? What are our staff ratios? And what is our schedule predictability? If we assume we can get there at a certain period of time, what's our predictability accuracy? And once we start measuring that in terms of applying resources, then we can start to improve it. And I've seen all kinds of creative ways of doing a better job with staffing projects. But I think based on our benchmarking, probably the largest single area that derails projects is not getting the right staff in the early and mid phases of the project. Towards the end of the project, when it's on fire, then it's easy to get all the people you need. But the early and mid phases of it is where staff ratios and our resource application to it is the right thing to look at. So this is a metrics tree to illustrate the idea of the flow down of the types of things to measure in terms of open innovation analytics. These are not the most common ones, but I believe they're the best ones. Benchmarking falls apart when everybody's measuring the wrong things. So what these are the things that I've seen that had a clear demonstration of benefit to companies that are trying to manage open innovation and doing it successfully. And these are just some more targets I put in. based on what I've seen at companies in terms of where do we want our each of these metrics to go. All right, so let's turn over to a dashboard. And I call these, again, best of the best dashboards. They're not the most common metrics, but I believe they're the best. They're the ones that track with companies that are successful in open innovation as opposed to companies that try and fail at open innovation. So let's begin with something from the chart before, patent or idea diffusion rate. Next up, what's our cycles of learning and our risk retirement rate? Next up, idea pipeline hurdle rate. What do we want in our pipeline in terms of how good they have to be to make it through the pipeline? And that rate, if it takes a 50% payback versus 100% payback to make it through our pipeline, we actually have stronger ideas if the hurdle rate can continue to rise higher and higher and still have the right number of projects and ideas come through the pipeline. So if we measure the hurdle rate in our pipeline for each of our gates as we move through or our cycles, then as that rises, that means we're getting higher quality ideas, so we can invest the same amount of money, but invest them in a much higher level of payback because our ideas are getting better. Information turns, I already discussed briefly. Information turns, as I mentioned, is what I think is one of the best metrics out there. It's somewhat complicated to set up, but once it's set up, you can use it to annihilate your competition that doesn't measure it. Listening posts, the network breadth. This is, if you only know of one external partner, then you're pretty limited in terms of what you can do in open innovation. But if you know of many, many partners, then you have a much broader selection of those things that you can use to get outside help in areas that might be able to benefit your project. And then finally, aggregate native intellectual property utilization. If you know how to do a certain percentage of those things and have existing intellectual property around them, and then you can put together a network of outside partners that have intellectual property already established to do the rest of it, then really your job becomes one of a system integrator, putting together what other people have already developed. And then, actually, are there questions now before I go to the last dashboard?
We do have a few questions, Wayne. Vladimir is asking, what kind of tools are available to optimize portfolio and resource utilization, and are analytics equal to metrics? I guess are those the same thing?
No, actually, I should. Let's go to the second part of that first. Maybe I should have made that a lot clearer. Metrics are ultimately the information that you use in analytics. Analytics is the intelligent application of metrics. In other words, I can have a lot or just a few metrics. A few metrics is often better if they're well thought out. Analytics are about using that information. What are the patterns here? What's gone on here that allows me to use this to make decisions? And so analytics are all about looking for patterns in your metrics that allow you to make decisions or take action, or at least gain some insight from them. So there's a lot of talk about analytics now, and I think that's probably a positive thing from the standpoint of looking at metrics not as the center of the universe. Instead, metrics are just a pathway to allow you to make decisions or gain insight. So that's the distinction, as I see it, between metrics and analytics. And having a lot of metrics is usually a bad idea because that means they're not well thought out, and it makes the analytics behind it that much harder. If you have to look at millions of pieces of data, the big data issue, then it makes it that much harder to look for patterns. And statistical correlation in those patterns may be a good exercise for statisticians, but if we have more insightful and fewer metrics, it makes the analytics behind it to make decisions much better. Can you read the first part again, Greg?
Do you have any tools to optimize portfolio and resource optimization?
Yeah. Portfolio management really runs on the concept of horizons and of using customer needs versus using financial payback. And this is a big subject. In fact, I've done some seminars for Management Roundtable where we spend a whole day on this. But let me try to put it into a 2-minute response. For long horizon type of technologies or business models or things we're developing, we need to use the relative size of the customer problem to guide our selection. The size of the customer problem as opposed to financial estimates. Now, why do we want to do that? We all know we want to make money on this stuff. But frankly, if you have a long horizon business model that you need to understand, There's no way in the world you can come up with an estimate for a financial payback until you understand the risks, until you understand how broad this will diffuse or anything else. So although it would be nice to have financial data, manufacturing it is the person presenting it won't believe it, and the person listening to it won't believe it either. But the size of the customer problem can be tracked because we can see the waste in the customer system and how big this problem is. That's for long horizon items. For short horizon items, we use financial measures to determine what we want to invest in. So once again, I'm boiling it down to a very short answer to a very big question. Then what we want to do is we want to draw our bar equating the size of the problem on the long-term things with the size of the financial benefit on the short-term things, and balancing our portfolio so that we have the right mix, excuse me, the right balance across both of those. And that's what allows us to have a balance of near, mid, and long-term investments that pay both our cash needs today as well as our cash needs 5 or 10 years into the future.
All right, Wayne, next question. Dane Billingsley is wondering, when it comes to very large corporations that may have many different groups and many interim steps in their process that make it difficult to keep track of, how do you measure information turns in that type of environment?
Yeah, information turns, like all metrics, have the property of level. For each one of the businesses, they will have a different measure of information turns. Why? Because they need different information. Another large subject that I'll just try to briefly touch on here is standardization of metrics is almost always a terrible idea. Why? Because there will be one organization in your company where those metrics are just the right ones. Every other organization, those will be somewhat off or a whole bunch off, which means the metrics become another job on top of their real work, and it becomes burdensome and bureaucratic. Each organization should have its own measures of information turns, yet you can tell them, okay, we need measures of information turns for each organization. So the category of metrics can be standardized, but the actual metric associated with it should be individual to the business unit, and for that matter, below that, individual to the projects themselves. What are their needs? And this is how we keep metrics from being burdensome and instead being mainstreamed into the stuff that has to get done, instead of it just being that extra job you have to do because the boss asked for it. Maybe go ahead. Okay, let's do one more question, then we'll go to the last slide.
Someone just wanted a clarification. If you go back to slide 17 on what the percentages for those targets really refers to.
Sure. These are, first of all, the actual numbers I just plugged in there. And so don't take the numbers to heart. But if we want to improve our listening posts, we set a target around it. If we want to increase the value of the ideas, we set a target around that. So if we want to have a higher projected level of payback, for instance, on the second one in the middle, increase the value of the ideas, we're going to want to have more far-out ideas, if you will, those that reach a huge customer problem or address a huge customer problem, even if they're inherently more risky or may require more iterations to get it right. Speed to market is pretty straightforward. The utilization of resources, this is the IP, the enterprise-wide IP play, where what we want to do there is look at, we want to have our resources focused on our things that we have existing IP for, and we want to utilize resources from the outside for those things where they have an advantage on it. The only caveat to that is keeping in mind not to give away our core stuff, even if somebody else is cheaper or better at it. And then the portfolio of investments, the last one. What we want to do is we want to, the best idea is to actually benchmark it, which we've taken some clients through. But if nothing else, understand your business needs right now, and understand, do we need to be taking a lot of big risks in that portfolio, in which case we want to balance our risks far into the new markets, new technologies type side. But we want to optimize our investments, the portfolio of them, to the best in class, and then make a variation based on our company's particular needs. Hopefully that's helpful in doing that.
Wayne, one last question before we finish off with the last segment. David is asking, when it comes to the metrics trees, what types of firms and with what types of results have you seen these implemented successfully?
We've used this in everything from paper plates to satellites. So, one part number to 2 million part numbers. So the tree itself as a mechanism is it's a visual tool to allow people to see where they fit in the larger picture of things. Metrics trees, by their nature, emphasize the property of level in metrics, which can sometimes get lost. We don't want the drill press operator measuring the same thing as the CEO. Although they both might be great metrics, they are a particular level. So what a tree does is it allows each of the different levels to set their metrics based on the goal that flows down to them. And so they've been used in multiple industry, in virtually every industry that we've touched. They're a simple, straightforward way of doing it. Now, an organization can have a lot of metrics trees, because remember, we're not standardizing, yet they all accumulate up to the top. They're all driven by the company's goals in achieving these types of things. And so what are they used for? This is the type of thing that tends to allow you to, using the combination of the process and the results metrics that I mentioned before, it allows you to continue to update these trees and keep your metric system alive. The metric of good metrics and good analytics in terms of trees is that you would use them even if you weren't forced to. They're the mainstream portion of getting your job done, and they're the best way of getting your job done. So hopefully that answered your question. All right, let me go on to the last set of dashboard items, and this is, if you will, a progression of. I get a lot of questions from companies in open innovation. How do I measure crowdsourcing? And it's a completely logical question. Now, the worst and beginning metric, although it's important, it's just a beginning, is clout. And that's how big is the network size and how many followers do you have. Now, there are people who have many, many followers, but may not still have the insight you need. So you follow clout, which is important, but you follow clout with activeness. So you may have a lot of followers, but are you using your network? Are those followers just people who you connected with once and then never heard from again and never clicked, never looks at you, doesn't follow you, things like that? So beyond clout, we go to activeness. We need the number of network messages and clicks. Still then, we can get a lot of clicks from automated systems. So let's go on to influence. Now, influence, so let's say we have clout, we're active. The influence is the number of resends. This is something where if if Eric says that this is something to look at, 50 people resend that out to 50 other people from each of them. That's the influence size of it, which is a critical piece of crowdsourcing. So the influencer piece of it is a further refinement. Then we go to focus. Now, they may be influencers, active, and have clout, but if the on-topic clicks are off, like let's say you make hand soap, and those influence and activeness metrics are showing that they're doing this having to do with mattresses, it doesn't do you much good. So focus needs to be measured, and that's measured as prioritized percentage of clicks on topic. And for this we use keywords and things like that in terms of the clicks, followed by return on investment. Now, if we have a network of followers and things like that, we can even track the idea of if we have all the influence, all the focus, all the activeness and clout measured, we can then see when those people click in and buy our product. And so the return on investment in terms of building the network allows us to actually measure, okay, so how many of those people actually bought from our stuff within the network of all those influencers, activeness, and clout. And then finally, adjacency. What about second and tertiary clicks on those prioritized topics? And adjacency has to do with this whole network not only brought somebody into us to buy our hand soap, but now they're also buying our air fresheners, they're buying our toilet paper, they're buying other things. And so adjacency is another measure of crowdsourcing. So this is a dashboard, and once again, I wouldn't say this is the most common measures of crowdsourcing, but these are from my experience, these are the best measures of crowdsourcing. These are the things that actually make a difference in companies that are using crowdsourcing effectively to be able to influence their products and to sell more and to sell at a higher margin. So let's open it up in our last minute, I guess, for any questions or any additional items that you want to discuss.
Just a reminder, if you do have a question, just type it into the Q&A window you see there at the bottom of your screen.
How do you share metrics with partners? There is a line that has to be drawn in terms of sharing metrics. So you need to categorize your metrics as those that you are willing to share. And with different partners, we share different things at different levels of that Maslow's hierarchy of partners. If we have a risk-reward sharing relationship, then what we often want to do is we want to take a look at the metrics that we want to share and share essentially everything with them because they're in this with us. The sharing of metrics with a arm's length partner is really limited. What we want to do, no matter what we're sharing with, we build little walls up, but what we want to make sure that we're doing is that we're using a single spot, which is called the single version of the truth. In other words, one database of metrics, not everybody having them on their individual PC. Okay. All right, looks like we're almost out of time. Do you want to tie this up, Greg, or do you want to extend?
Yeah, maybe if you can just put up your first slide, maybe there, Wayne. Just to let everybody know, we will be sending each of you an evaluation and a link to an evaluation form via email, and we ask that you please send that to everyone who joined you today's call if they weren't able to sign up themselves. And after you do fill out that form, you will get a link to a copy of the slides used today in PDF format and a link to a recording of today's session that you can also share with people. If you do need to follow up with Wayne, I'm sure he'd be happy to answer any additional questions you have if you send him an email, excuse me, or get in touch with them through pdcinc.com, which is his company's website. And also don't forget that on March 6th, Wayne will be leading a session for us in San Francisco on the subject of 3D printing and additive manufacturing. If you want to have any information on that or other Management Roundtable programs, such as the CoDev 2014 conference coming up in a couple weeks in Phoenix, just go to managementroundtable.com. That's it for today. Thank you, Wayne, for sharing your time with us. And thank all of you today for participating. We will hope to see you again at a future Management Roundtable event. And that's it. We release you for today. Have a great one, everybody.
Okay. Thank you for your participation.